The glass door exploded into a spiderweb of cracks as Captain Aisha Grant's face slammed against it, her designer purse flying across the marble floor while shoppers gasped and phones emerged like weapons. "Stop resisting!" Officer Cole Hardy barked, his knee pressing into her spine as handcuffs bit into her wrists. But this wasn't just another case of shopping while black. This was the moment a 20-year police veteran discovered how deep the corruption in her own city ran, and how a simple shopping trip for her daughter's birthday would expose a criminal conspiracy worth millions. I'm about to tell you a story that will make your blood boil and your heart race. Stick with me until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story has traveled, because what happened in Ridgeview could be happening in your town right now. The morning sun cast long shadows through the glass atrium of Ridgeview Galleria as Captain Aisha Grant stepped through the automatic doors. Her off-duty attire, a simple navy blazer over dark jeans, a welcome change from the uniform she'd worn for 2 decades. She breathed in the familiar scent of cinnamon pretzels mixing with expensive perfume from the nearby cosmetics counter, allowing herself a rare moment of normalcy. Her daughter Maya's 18th birthday was tomorrow, and after weeks of double shifts and community meetings, Aisha had finally carved out this Saturday morning to find the perfect gift. "Welcome to Ridgeview," a voice chirped, but when Aisha turned to acknowledge the greeter, the young woman had already moved on to the next customer, a blonde woman in yoga pants who received a warm smile and shopping map. Aisha didn't let it bother her. 20 years on the force had taught her to pick her battles, and today wasn't about fighting. Today was about Maya. She made her way toward Celestial Boutique, the upscale jewelry store where she'd spotted a delicate gold bracelet with Maya's birthstone during a quick lunch break last month. The mall was filling up now, families pushing strollers, teenagers clustered around the bubble tea stand, the ordinary rhythm of suburban life that Aisha had spent her career protecting. But as she passed the information kiosk, she noticed something in her peripheral vision. A security guard, young white, muscled like he spent more time at the gym than reading his training manual, had fallen into step about 30 feet behind her. Probably heading the same direction, she thought, but 2 decades of police work had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. She paused at a store window pretending to admire a mannequin's outfit while watching the guard's reflection. He stopped, too suddenly fascinated by his phone. When she moved, he moved. When she stopped, he stopped. The second guard appeared near the fountain, older, trying to look casual as he spoke into his radio. The words were too quiet to hear, but Aisha could read the body language they were coordinating, boxing her in with the practiced choreography of men who'd done this before. Her jaw tightened. She knew this dance, had seen it performed on countless young black men and women who'd committed no crime except existing in spaces where some people thought they didn't belong. But she'd never been on this side of it. She continued toward Celestial Boutique, her stride steady, professional, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. The store's elegant facade came into view, soft lighting displays that sparkled like captured stars, and behind the register, Karen Pierce, the manager, whose bottle blonde hair and frozen smile had greeted Aisha during her previous visit with significantly less warmth than she showed her other customers. The bell above the door chimed as Aisha entered, and Karen's head snapped up from her phone. Their eyes met, and something flickered across the manager's face. Not surprise, but anticipation, like an actor waiting for their cue. "Can I help you?" Karen asked, her tone carrying the subtle edge that suggested help was the last thing she intended to provide. "I'm looking for a bracelet I saw here last month," Aisha replied evenly. "Gold with an amethyst stone. It was in the window display." "We've changed our displays," Karen said, not moving from behind the counter. "That item might not be available." Through the glass storefront, Aisha could see both security guards had positioned themselves outside, one by the entrance, one by the mall corridor. Her police training cataloged exits automatically: back room probably locked, air vent too small, front door blocked. But why would she need exits? She was shopping for her daughter's birthday, not planning an escape route. "Could you check?" Aisha asked, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. It was right there, second shelf between the pearl necklace and the silver watch. Karen made a show of typing on her computer, her manicured nails clicking against the keys with theatrical precision. I'm not seeing it in our system. Perhaps you're thinking of another store. No, Aisha said firmly. It was here. I spoke with a sales associate named Jennifer about it. Jennifer no longer works here, Karen replied quickly, too quickly. And I'm afraid without a specific item number, I can't help you. Store policy. The dismissal was clear, but Aisha wasn't ready to leave empty-handed. She moved toward the display cases, scanning the glittering contents for Maya's bracelet. She could feel Karen's eyes tracking her every movement like a security camera given human form. There, third case from the left, partially hidden behind a display stand. The bracelet caught the light, its amethyst stone throwing purple shadows across the velvet. That one, Aisha said, pointing. The bracelet with the amethyst. Karen's face went through a series of micro-expressions, annoyance, calculation, decision. She walked over slowly, each heel click echoing in the suddenly quiet store. As she reached for the case keys on her belt, her other hand moved to her pocket. The gesture was subtle, but Aisha caught it. The woman was texting someone. This bracelet is $350, Karen announced, as if the price might send Aisha running. Cash only for items over $300. New policy. That was a lie. Aisha had seen customers use cards for designer bags worth thousands just minutes ago. But she had cash. She'd stopped at the ATM specifically for this purchase. That's fine, she said, reaching for her purse. Karen unlocked the case with deliberate slowness, removed the bracelet, and set it on the counter. As Aisha approached to examine it, Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her entire demeanor shifted like a predator catching scent of prey. Actually, Karen said, her hand hovering over the bracelet, I need to verify something first. This piece was supposed to be held for another customer. You just said you couldn't find it in your system. Aisha pointed out, her patience wearing thin. Karen's frozen smile stretched wider. Store policy requires me to check all holds before completing a sale. One moment. She picked up the bracelet and turned toward the back room. But as she moved, something fell from the display area, a small silver charm barely visible as it tumbled to the floor. Oh! Karen gasped with practiced surprise. Did you just... She spun around, eyes wide with manufactured shock. That charm was part of our limited collection. Where is it? Aisha stood perfectly still, her hands visible and empty at her sides. A charm fell when you moved the bracelet. It's right there on the floor. But Karen wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking at Aisha's purse, her expression morphing into accusation. I need to check your bag. That charm is worth $500. The charm is on the floor. Aisha repeated, her voice taking on the commanding tone she used with rookie officers. Right beside your left heel. Karen stepped back, her shoe deliberately kicking the charm under the counter. I don't see anything. Empty your bag on the counter. Now. The security guards had moved closer to the entrance, their shapes dark against the glass. Aisha could see other shoppers starting to notice the confrontation, some slowing their pace. Others pulling out phones with the instinct of a generation raised on viral videos. I'm not emptying my bag, Aisha stated clearly. You have no reasonable suspicion of theft. The charm fell when you moved the bracelet and you just kicked it under the counter. Check your security footage if you need verification. Are you refusing to comply? Karen's voice rose pitched to carry beyond the store. We have a situation here. The first security guard entered, his hand already resting on his tactical belt, loaded with pepper spray and zip tie restraints. Up close, Aisha could see his name tag Derek and the eager gleam in his eyes of someone who'd been waiting for action all week. The second guard blocked the doorway, his bulk filling the frame like a cork in a bottle. Ma'am, we're going to need you to comply with the store manager's request. Derek said, his tone suggesting this wasn't a request at all. I'm not consenting to a search, Aisha replied, her training keeping her voice calm despite her rising anger. I haven't left the store with any merchandise. You have no legal authority to search my personal belongings. Look. The second guard, whose tag read, Mike, stepped forward with false friendliness. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just show us what's in the bag and you can go. Or you can check under the counter where Ms. Pierce kicked the charm, Aisha suggested. Your cameras will show exactly what happened. Karen's face flushed. Are you calling me a liar? Derek, call the police. We have a hostile customer refusing to comply with loss prevention protocols. The word hostile was a trigger. Aisha knew a verbal sleight of hand that transformed a calm black woman asserting her rights into a threat requiring force. She'd seen it in too many reports, heard it in too many testimonies. But knowing the playbook didn't mean she could change the game. Please call the police. Aisha agreed. I'll wait right here. Derek was already on his radio, his words crackling through the static. We need police response at Celestial Boutique Ridgeview Galleria. Black female, approximately 40 years old, refusing to comply with loss prevention. Subject is becoming agitated. I'm standing completely still, Aisha said loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. I'm not agitated. I'm exercising my constitutional rights. A teenager with purple hair had her phone out recording everything. Good, Aisha thought. Evidence. Always get evidence. She kept her hands visible, her posture non-threatening, even as her mind raced through procedures and protocols. In her uniform, she'd be the one responding to this call. Out of uniform, she was just another black woman being criminalized for existing in an upscale space. Everyone please step back, Mike announced to the growing crowd. Give us room to handle this situation. What situation? An elderly man asked. She's just standing there. Sir, please move along. Derek said, his hand hovering near his pepper spray. This is a security matter. Through the store's speakers, Aisha could hear the mall's pleasant background music, some generic pop song about freedom and dreams, creating a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding confrontation. Karen had retreated behind her counterphone in hand, typing furiously. The smirk playing at the corners of her mouth suggested she was enjoying this, had maybe even orchestrated it. You know, Aisha said loud enough for the cameras to pick up, that charm is under your counter. When the police arrive and check the security footage, they're going to see you kick it there. They're going to see you texting someone before falsely accusing me of theft. This is all being recorded. Karen's smirk faltered for just a second before hardening into defiance. We'll see what the police say when they get here. The sirens were audible now, growing louder, closer. Aisha had heard that sound thousands of times from the other side, racing to help, to protect, to serve. Now it sounded different. Ominous, threatening, a countdown to a confrontation she couldn't control despite 20 years of training and experience. The cruiser's lights painted red and blue streaks across the mall's polished floors as it pulled up outside. Two officers emerged, moving with the purposeful stride of men who'd already decided guilt before assessing innocence. The lead officer was built like a linebacker, his uniform stretched tight across his chest, his hand already resting on his weapon. The name Hardy was visible on his tag, and something about the way he moved, aggressive, eager, predatory, sent a chill down Aisha's spine. Officer Cole Hardy entered the store like he owned it, his presence immediately shifting the energy from tense to dangerous. His partner, a younger officer named Mercer, followed close behind, eyes scanning for threats that existed only in their assumptions. We got a report of a theft and refusal to comply. Hardy announced, his gaze locking onto Aisha with laser focus. Ma'am, I need you to step outside with us. Officer. Aisha began, her voice professional. There's been a misunderstanding. I haven't taken anything. The store manager. Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again. Hardy interrupted, stepping closer, using his size to intimidate. Outside. Now. I know my rights, Aisha said firmly. I haven't committed any crime. I'm not under arrest. I'm free to leave on my own, but I'm choosing to wait here to clear this up. Hardy's face darkened. You're refusing a lawful order. What lawful order? You haven't articulated any reasonable suspicion of a crime. The store manager falsely accused me of taking a charm that she kicked under the counter. Check the security footage. I don't need to check anything, Hardy snarled, reaching for Aisha's arm. You're coming with us. Don't touch me, Aisha warned, stepping back. I'm Captain Aisha Grant, Metro Police Department, badge number 4827. My badge is in my left jacket pocket. The words should have been a magic spell, a shield, a force field that stopped everything cold. In a just world, Hardy would have stepped back, apologized, maybe even saluted. But Hardy's hand didn't slow his expression, didn't change except to grow more contemptuous. Sure you are, he sneered, and I'm the chief. Hands behind your back, now. Check my pocket. Aisha insisted, her heart pounding as she recognized the point of no return approaching. My badge and ID are right there. But Hardy wasn't interested in badges or truth or justice. He grabbed Aisha's wrist, and when she instinctively pulled away, a reflexive action born of surprise, not resistance, he had his excuse. Resisting arrest, he barked, spinning Aisha around with practiced violence. Her face met the glass door with a crack that resonated through the store, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through her cheekbone. Blood appeared on the glass, a crimson exclamation point to the injustice unfolding. The crowd gasped collectively, phones rising like witnesses at a digital trial. Oh my God, someone shouted. She wasn't doing anything. Stop resisting, Hardy commanded loudly for the cameras, even as Aisha had gone completely limp, offering no resistance as he wrenched her arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked with finality metal, biting into her wrists with unnecessary tightness. My badge, Aisha managed through the pain, tasting blood where her lip had split against the glass. Left pocket, please. Mercer looked uncertain, his hand hovering near her pocket, but Hardy shook his head sharply. Don't bother. We'll sort it out at the station. This is wrong. The purple-haired teenager shouted, her phone steady, despite her shaking voice. She didn't do anything, the manager lied. Everyone back up, Mercer ordered, finally finding his voice. This is police business. They perp-walked Aisha through the mall. Hardy's grip on her arm, possessive and punishing. Blood dripped from her face onto the pristine marble floor, leaving a trail of evidence that would be mopped away within the hour. Shoppers pressed against store windows, workers emerged from back rooms, everyone watching the spectacle of a black woman in handcuffs being paraded past the Gap, past Starbucks, past the American dream itself. Look at me, a young black mother whispered to her son, pulling him close. Don't look. But everyone was looking, everyone was recording. The mall that had been filled with the sounds of commerce and conversation had gone silent, except for footsteps and whispers, and the electronic chirp of phones capturing history in real time. At the cruiser, Hardy pushed Aisha's head down roughly as he forced her into the back seat, a move designed to humiliate as much as restrain. But as he slammed the door, another police car pulled up, and out stepped Sergeant Michelle Davis, a 15-year veteran who'd worked with Aisha on numerous cases. Davis took one look at the scene, the blood on Aisha's face, the crowd with their phones, Hardy's aggressive posture, and her expression shifted from confusion to horror. Hardy, what the hell is going on? Davis demanded, approaching the cruiser. Is that Jesus Christ? Is that Captain Grant? Hardy's swagger evaporated like morning mist. She was resisting. Open the door, now. Davis commanded with the authority of someone who'd just realized she was witnessing a catastrophic mistake. Get those cuffs off her immediately. But that's Captain Aisha Grant, you idiot. She runs the Community Relations Division. She's been on the force longer than you've been alive. Davis was already pulling the door open, her hands gentle as she helped Aisha out. Captain, I'm so sorry. Are you hurt? We need to get you medical attention. Aisha stood slowly, dignified despite the blood on her face and the ache in her wrists as Davis removed the handcuffs. The crowd had grown larger, their phones capturing this reversal, this revelation, this moment when the system's mask slipped to reveal the ugly machinery beneath. "My badge is in my left pocket," Aisha said quietly, and Davis retrieved it, holding the gold shield up like evidence at a trial. "Captain Aisha Grant," Davis announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear. 20-year veteran of the Metro Police Department. The crowd erupted in outrage. "She told you," someone shouted. "She told you she was a cop and you still did this." Hardy's face had gone pale, his eyes darting between Aisha Davis and the dozens of recording phones. "She was," the manager said. She refused to comply. "With an illegal search," Aisha said, her voice carrying the weight of authority despite her injuries. "Based on a false accusation, which you would have known if you'd done even the most basic investigation instead of immediately escalating to force." Karen Pierce had emerged from the store, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She started to back away, but the crowd had formed a loose circle, their phones tracking her movement like digital bloodhounds. "That's her," the purple-haired teenager pointed. "She's the one who lied. She kicked the charm under the counter herself. I saw it." "Ma'am, please don't leave," Davis called to Karen, but the manager was already retreating into the store, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm of escape. Aisha touched her face, her fingers coming away red with blood. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind pain and a rage so deep it felt geological, built up over years of watching this happen to others, of filing reports, of attending meetings where they discussed proper procedures and community relations, while nothing fundamental ever changed. "Captain Grant," Davis said softly, "we need to get you to the hospital. Document your injuries, and then—" She paused, looking at Hardy with disgust. "Then Internal Affairs is going to want to hear about this." "Internal Affairs," Aisha repeated, tasting the words like medicine that had long since expired. "Right." A notification buzzed on Hardy's phone and he glanced at it reflexively. His face, already pale, went white as paper. He showed it to Mercer, whose expression mirrored his partner's sudden terror. They were looking at something on social media. The video was already spreading, already viral, already beyond their ability to control or contain. "Captain." Hardy started, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I didn't know." "You didn't care," Aisha corrected him. "There's a difference. You didn't care to look, didn't care to check, didn't care that I was a human being deserving of basic dignity and rights." She turned to Davis. "I'll drive myself to the hospital. I want copies of all body cam footage, all dispatch recordings, all surveillance video from the mall and the store." "Of course, Captain. I'll make sure—" "No," Aisha interrupted. "I'll make sure. This isn't going to disappear into the system. Not this time." As she walked toward her car, escorted by Davis, the crowd parted respectfully. Someone started clapping the elderly man who'd questioned the situation earlier. Others joined in, not in celebration, but in solidarity, in recognition of what they'd witnessed and what it meant. "Captain Grant," the purple-haired teenager called out, running up with her phone. "I got everything. The whole thing. Where should I send it?" Aisha looked at the young woman, 16, maybe 17, around Maya's age, and saw the future she'd been fighting for her entire career. "What's your name?" "Tiana. Tiana Brooks." "Thank you, Tiana. Send it to the news stations, all of them, and post it everywhere. Make sure everyone sees what happened here today." As Aisha drove away, her face throbbing, her wrists marked with handcuff bruises, her phone began to buzz with increasing frequency. Texts, calls, notifications, the digital age's version of Paul Revere's ride, spreading the word that something significant had happened at Ridgeview Galleria, something that couldn't be covered up or explained away, or filed into administrative oblivion. At home that evening, after the hospital had documented her injuries, after the preliminary reports had been filed, after she'd assured Maya that she was okay. Despite the bandage on her face, Aisha sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open. The video had been viewed over 1 million times in 6 hours. The comments ranged from outrage to calls for justice to the inevitable trolls suggesting she must have done something to deserve it. Her department email dinged with a message marked urgent from Chief Patterson. She opened it expecting platitudes about regrettable incidents and promises of thorough investigations. Instead, she found something worse. Captain Grant. Pending a full investigation into today's incident at Ridgeview Galleria, you are being placed on administrative leave effective immediately. This is standard procedure when an officer is involved in a controversial incident that may bring negative attention to the department. Please surrender your badge and service weapon to Internal Affairs by 0900 Monday morning. Chief Patterson. Administrative leave. They were suspending her, not Hardy. The officer who'd slammed her face into glass was probably at home watching TV while she was being treated like the problem. Her phone rang Jordan Lee, her friend from law school, who'd become a defense attorney instead of a prosecutor. Aisha, I just saw the video, and I just got off the phone with a contact at the department. They're going to try to bury this. They're suspending me. Aisha said the words tasting like ashes. Of course they are. You're the threat now. You're the cop who got caught being black in public, and worse, you're the cop with the standing and credibility to make noise about it. They need to neutralize you before you become a symbol. I never wanted to be a symbol, Aisha said quietly. I just wanted to buy my daughter a birthday present. I know, Jordan replied. But sometimes the fight chooses us. Listen, I've been building a case file on similar incidents at that mall. There's a pattern, Aisha. This isn't random. Can you come by my office tomorrow and bring everything, every document, every email, every text? After ending the call, Aisha sat in the darkness of her kitchen, the only light coming from her laptop screen where the video played on repeat. Her face meeting glass, blood-appearing dignity destroyed all because she dared to shop while black, in a place where some people believed she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off, Captain. You don't know how deep this goes. For your daughter's sake, let it go. Aisha stared at the message, fear and anger warring in her chest. Someone was threatening her. Someone who knew about Maya. Someone who thought they could intimidate a woman who'd spent 20 years facing down drug dealers, domestic abusers, and corrupt politicians. They were about to learn differently. She forwarded the threat to Jordan and added her own message. They just made this personal. I'm all in. The next morning, Sunday, Aisha woke to find her driveway filled with news vans. Reporters stood on her lawn like eager ravens, microphones extended like beaks hungry for sound bites. She closed the curtain and checked her phone. 57 missed calls, over 200 text messages, and her email inbox showing 999 plus unread messages. Maya appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding her own phone. Mom, you're trending. #1 on Twitter. People are calling you the Captain America of civil rights. I'm just your mom, Aisha said, pulling her daughter close. And I'm sorry your birthday weekend got ruined. Ruined. Maya pulled back, her eyes fierce with pride. Mom, you stood up to them. You showed everyone what we deal with. This is the best birthday present you could have given me, proof that my mother is exactly the hero I always knew she was. The doorbell rang, and through the peephole, Aisha saw not a reporter, but Nadia Reyes, the investigative journalist who'd won a Pulitzer for exposing corruption in the state prison system. She was holding a box of files and looking over her shoulder nervously. Aisha opened the door. Miss Reyes. Captain Grant. I've been investigating Ridgeview Galleria for 6 months, Nadia said quickly. What happened to you yesterday? It's happened to 47 other people in the last year, all black or Latino, all arrested on false pretenses. And they all have something in common. They all took plea deals with the same private probation company. Private probation company. Aisha invited her in, away from the cameras and microphones. New Horizon Supervision Services, Nadia explained, spreading files on the coffee table. They have a contract with the city. Every person who takes a plea deal and gets probation has to pay them $75 a month in supervision fees, plus drug testing, plus mandatory classes. It's a pipeline false arrest to plea deal to private probation. And guess who owns New Horizon? She pulled out a corporate filing document. Aisha read the name and felt her blood turn to ICE Ridgeview Development Group, the same company that owned the mall. They're manufacturing criminals. Aisha whispered, the scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. They're using the stores to create arrests, the courts to force plea deals, and then profiting from the probation. And there's more. Nadia continued, pulling out another document. I've tracked payments from New Horizon to several city officials, including... She paused, looking at Aisha with sympathy. Including 3 members of the Police Oversight Board. Aisha's phone rang. It was Lieutenant Mark Halverson, her old mentor, the man who'd encouraged her to join the force 20 years ago. Aisha, I heard what happened. It's unconscionable. Listen, I still have friends in high places. Let me make some calls, see if I can get your suspension lifted and Hardy properly disciplined. Thanks, Mark, Aisha said, but something in his eager tone made her suspicious. I appreciate it. Just keep your head down for a few days, let me work behind the scenes. And Aisha, maybe don't talk to any reporters just yet. You know how they can twist things. After hanging up, Aisha looked at Nadia. My mentor just told me not to talk to reporters. Interesting timing, Nadia observed. Captain, I think we need to be very careful about who we trust. This goes higher than street-level cops and mall security. We're talking about a systematic... The sound of breaking glass interrupted her. They rushed to the window to see Aisha's car windshield spiderwebbed with cracks of brick lying on the hood. Painted on the brick in red letters, Traitor. They're escalating, Nadia said grimly. They're scared. Which means we're close to something big. That afternoon, Jordan Lee's office became a war room. Papers covered every surface. Arrest records, corporate filings, financial documents, social media posts. Jordan had called in 2 other attorneys, and Tiana Brooks had arrived with 3 other young activists, all armed with laptops and righteous anger. Look at this pattern, Jordan said, pointing to a chart on the whiteboard. Every arrest at Ridgeview follows the same script. Security calls about a suspicious person. They claim theft or non-compliance, police arrive and escalate, arrest is made. The person, usually poor, usually a person of color, can't afford bail. Public defender suggests a plea deal, time served, plus probation. They take it to get out and boom, they're in the New Horizon system for 2 years minimum. It's a perfect trap, one of the other attorneys added. And completely legal technically. Except for the false arrests, of course. Which they've been getting away with because who's going to believe a poor black teenager over a store manager and 2 cops? Tiana said bitterly. Except now they messed with the wrong person. They got someone with a badge and credibility. And someone who kept her cool and got it all on video. Aisha added, nodding to Tiana. Your footage is the key. It shows Karen deliberately creating the situation. About that, Nadia interjected, pulling up something on her laptop. I've been digging into Karen Pierce. She's not just a store manager. She's been receiving monthly payments from a shell company connected to New Horizon. She's literally being paid to generate arrests. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't incompetence or implicit bias. It was organized crime wearing the mask of law and order. Aisha's phone buzzed with a text from Halverson. Can you meet me tonight? Urgent, come alone. I have information about who's behind the threats. She showed it to the group. Jordan immediately shook his head. That's either a trap or he's involved. No one goes alone anywhere. Agreed, Nadia said. But we could use this. Captain, what if you meet him? But we have backup. I can be nearby with a camera. As they planned, none of them noticed the van parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding the surveillance equipment pointed at Jordan's office. None of them saw Officer Mercer in civilian clothes taking photos of everyone who entered and left. And none of them knew that at that very moment, Chief Patterson was in an emergency meeting with the mayor, the district attorney, and the CEO of New Horizon, all of them trying to figure out how to contain the situation before it exploded beyond their control. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Aisha stood in her daughter's room watching Maya sleep. Tomorrow was her 18th birthday, and instead of celebrating, they'd be dealing with lawyers and reporters and death threats. She'd wanted to give her daughter a simple bracelet. Instead, she'd given her a front-row seat to the ugly reality of the world they lived in. Her phone lit up with another notification. The video had now been viewed 10 million times. Justice for Captain Grant was trending globally. People were sharing their own stories of false arrests, of plea deals taken under duress, of private probation companies that trapped them in cycles of debt and surveillance. A revolution was starting, and it had begun with a mother trying to buy her daughter a birthday present. But revolutions, Aisha knew from her study of history, demanded sacrifice. And she was about to learn just how much this one would cost. The parking garage beneath the old Montgomery building stretched out in shadows and fluorescent flickers, the kind of place where secrets went to die or be born. Aisha checked her rear-view mirror one more time, confirming Nadia's sedan was parked 2 levels up the journalist's camera, ready to capture whatever was about to unfold. Lieutenant Mark Halverson's silver BMW was already there, engine off, the man himself, a silhouette behind tinted glass. "I'm going in," Aisha said into her phone, keeping the line open to Jordan, who was monitoring from his office. "If you don't hear from me in 20 minutes, we call in the cavalry," Jordan assured her. "Be careful, Aisha. Something about this whole setup feels wrong." Everything about it felt wrong, but wrong was becoming the new normal, in a city where mall security guards were being paid to manufacture criminals. Aisha stepped out of her car, her footsteps echoing in the concrete cavern. Halverson emerged from his vehicle, and even in the dim light, she could see the strain on his face, the way his usually perfect uniform seemed rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in it. "Aisha," he said, his voice carrying a tremor she'd never heard before. "Thank you for coming. I know this looks suspicious, but I couldn't risk meeting anywhere else. They're watching everything now." "Who's they, Mark?" Aisha kept her distance, her hand instinctively moving to where her service weapon would normally rest, finding only empty space thanks to her suspension. "The same people who've been watching you since yesterday, the same ones who threw that brick through your windshield." He pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. "I've been investigating this for months, working with a federal task force. We're so close to bringing them down, but your incident accelerated everything. They're panicked, which makes them dangerous." Aisha took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Inside were photographs: Hardy meeting with men in expensive suits, Karen Pierce at a restaurant with the CEO of New Horizon, and most shocking of all, Chief Patterson shaking hands with Vincent Wilson, the billionaire owner of Ridgeview Development Group. "How deep does this go?" she asked, though the evidence was already painting a clear picture. "All the way to the top. The mayor's campaign was funded by Wilson. The district attorney's son works for New Horizon. Half the city council has investments in Ridgeview Development. It's a machine, Aisha, and it's been running for years." A car engine roared to life somewhere in the garage, the sound bouncing off concrete walls. Both of them tensed, but it was just someone leaving from a different level. The paranoia was contagious, necessary, potentially life-saving. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Aisha demanded. "Why let me walk into that mall blind?" Halverson's face crumpled with guilt. "I didn't know it would be you. They usually target people who can't fight back, people who'll take the plea deal and disappear into the system. When I heard what happened, I realized we could use this. Your credibility, your video evidence, it's the smoking gun we needed. Use this." Aisha's anger flared. "Use me getting my face slammed into glass. Use my daughter getting death threats. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Mark?" She stepped closer, and he backed up against his car. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were willing to let innocent people get railroaded as long as you could build your federal case." "We had to let it play out," he said desperately. If we'd moved too early, they would have scattered destroyed evidence, bought their way out. We needed—" His words were cut off by the squeal of tires. A black SUV came around the corner, fast, too fast for a parking garage, its headlights blinding them both. Aisha grabbed Halverson, pulling him behind his car as the SUV screeched to a halt. Doors opened, and out stepped Hardy and Mercer, both in civilian clothes, both carrying weapons they shouldn't have had access to while under investigation. "Well, well," Hardy said, his voice dripping with menace. "The traitor and the snitch. Perfect." "You're making a mistake," Halverson said, trying to summon authority. "I'm a lieutenant." "You're a rat." Mercer cut him off. "Who's been feeding information to the feds? Yeah, we know all about your little task force. Mr. Wilson has friends everywhere, including the FBI." Aisha's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, options. Her phone was still connected to Jordan, recording everything. Nadia was 2 levels up with a camera. But none of that would matter if Hardy decided to pull that trigger. "You really think you're going to shoot 2 cops in a parking garage and walk away?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Hardy smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd crossed lines before and gotten away with it. Tragic murder-suicide. Disgraced captain couldn't handle the shame, killed her mentor who was trying to talk her down. We've got people who'll swear they saw you acting erratically. Except for the witnesses, Aisha said, loud enough for her phone to pick up clearly. "The ones recording this right now." Mercer spun around, scanning the garage, and in that moment of distraction, Halverson made his move. The older cop lunged for Mercer's gun, and the garage exploded into chaos. The weapon fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet striking concrete and sending chips flying. Aisha rolled behind a pillar as Hardy swung his weapon toward her, another shot ringing out, this one shattering a car window. "Jordan, now!" she shouted into her phone, and within seconds, sirens were wailing from multiple directions. Not just police fire trucks, ambulances, everything Jordan could call to create witnesses and chaos. Hardy and Mercer looked at each other, realizing their plan was falling apart. They ran for their SUV, but Halverson, blood streaming from where concrete chips had cut his face, had pulled his backup weapon. "Stop or I'll shoot," he commanded, and for a moment time, froze 4 cops in a standoff, 2 corrupt, 1 federal informant, and 1 suspended captain who just wanted justice. The SUV's engine roared, and they peeled out tires, smoking, leaving Halverson and Aisha in the sudden silence that follows violence. Then the garage filled with lights and sirens and uniforms, including Sergeant Davis, who took in the scene with professional efficiency. "Captain Grant, Lieutenant Halverson, are you injured?" "We're fine," Aisha said, though her hands were shaking. "But Officers Hardy and Mercer just tried to kill us. They're armed and dangerous." As Halverson gave his statement to the federal agents who arrived suspiciously quickly, Aisha noticed something he'd dropped in the chaos, a second envelope smaller that had fallen from his jacket. She picked it up discreetly, opening it to find a single sheet of paper with a list of names and dollar amounts. Her blood ran cold as she recognized what she was looking at, a payment ledger showing bribes from New Horizon to police officers. And there, near the bottom, was Halverson's name, with $50,000 next to it. She looked up to find him watching her, his expression resigned. "It's not what it looks like," he said quietly, stepping away from the federal agents. "I took the money to maintain my cover, to stay on the inside. Every penny is in an FBI evidence account." But Aisha wasn't sure she believed him anymore. Trust once broken was hard to repair, and in this maze of corruption, anyone could be playing multiple sides. That night, Maya's 18th birthday began at midnight, with mother and daughter sitting in a hotel room, their home no longer safe after the attempt on Aisha's life. The bracelet, the one that started everything, sat in an evidence bag, a symbol of how a simple gesture of love could trigger a war. "I'm sorry," Aisha said for the 100th time. "This isn't how I wanted your birthday to be." Maya, wise beyond her years, took her mother's hand. "Mom, you're fighting for something bigger than a birthday. You're fighting for all the kids who don't have a police captain, for a mother who would have just disappeared into that system. I'm proud of you." A knock on the door made them both freeze, but it was Jordan's voice that called out, "It's me with Nadia and Tiana." They entered carrying a cake, 18 candles already lit, their faces showing the exhaustion of the past 48 hours, but also a determination that matched Aisha's own. "Make a wish," Tiana said to Maya, and as the young woman closed her eyes and blew out the candles, Aisha wondered what she wished for: safety, justice, or just a normal life that now seemed impossibly far away. Nadia's phone buzzed with an alert. "Oh my God," she said, her face paling. "Hardy and Mercer are dead." The room went silent, the cake forgotten. Nadia showed them her phone, a news alert about 2 officers found shot in their vehicle on a remote road outside the city. The initial report suggested they'd killed each other in a dispute, but everyone in the room knew better. "They're cleaning house," Jordan said grimly, "tying up loose ends." "Which means we're next," Aisha replied, the weight of the situation crushing down on her. They weren't just fighting corruption anymore. They were fighting people willing to kill their own to keep secrets buried. The next morning brought a circus to the city. News vans surrounded the police station, the mall, City Hall. The deaths of Hardy and Mercer had transformed a story about police brutality and corruption into something darker, more sinister. Conspiracy theorists were having a field day, but even their wildest speculations didn't come close to the truth. Chief Patterson held a press conference, his face grave, as he announced a full investigation into the deaths and the alleged corruption at Ridgeview Galleria. He praised Officer Hardy's service record, mentioned Mercer's commendations, and suggested that Captain Grant's provocative actions had created an environment of tension that led to this tragedy. "He's blaming me," Aisha said, watching from the hotel room. "Those men tried to kill me, and now that they're dead, I'm somehow responsible." "Let him talk," Nadia said furiously, typing on her laptop. "I've got something better. Remember that video Tiana took? I've been analyzing it frame by frame. Look at this." She zoomed in on a portion of the video from before Aisha had even entered the store. There, clear as day, was Hardy talking to Karen Pierce, their heads close together. Hardy passing her something that looked like a phone. "They were coordinating before you even went in," Tiana said, leaning closer to the screen. "This was all planned." "But why me specifically?" Aisha wondered aloud. "How did they know I'd be there?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Reverend Marcus Hale, a community leader who'd been fighting for police reform for decades, arrived at the hotel with information that changed everything. "Captain Grant," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "I've been contacted by someone inside New Horizon. They want to meet to provide evidence, but they'll only talk to you." "It's a trap," Jordan said immediately. "After what happened with Halverson." "I don't think so," the Reverend interrupted. "This person has been feeding me information for weeks. They're scared, Captain. They say the company is planning something big, something that will make what happened to you look like a rehearsal." Aisha considered her options. Every meeting could be a trap, every source could be compromised, but sitting still meant letting them win. "Set it up," she decided. "But this time, we do it my way." The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at Reverend Hale's church, a place that even Wilson's reach hopefully couldn't corrupt. The source turned out to be a nervous accountant named David Chen, whose hands shook as he handed over a flash drive. "I processed the payments," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just to cops and security guards, but to judges, prosecutors, probation officers. The whole system is bought and paid for. But that's not the worst part." He pulled up files on his laptop showing spreadsheets that made Aisha's stomach turn. "They have quotas. Each store in the mall has to generate at least 2 arrests per week. If they don't meet quota, they lose their security bonuses. Your arrest, Captain Grant, was supposed to be their 3rd this week. They were behind schedule." "How many people?" Aisha asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "In the past 5 years, over 3,000. Most took plea deals. They're all in the New Horizon system now, paying fees they can't afford, trapped in a cycle designed to send them back to jail. The magnitude of it was staggering. 3,000 lives destroyed for profit, 3,000 families torn apart, 3,000 people who'd walked into a mall and ended up in a criminal justice maze they couldn't escape. There's more. Chen continued, his nervousness increasing. They're planning to expand. 5 new malls in the state, all with the same system. They're calling it the Ridgeview model. They even have a PowerPoint presentation for investors. He showed them slides that would have been corporate boring if they hadn't been outlining a plan to systematically criminalize poverty and race. Projected revenue streams, growth charts, market penetration strategies, all built on false arrests and coerced plea deals. "Will you testify?" Aisha asked, knowing what she was asking him to risk. Chen nodded slowly. "They killed Hardy and Mercer just for failing to kill you. I know what speaking out means, but I can't keep processing these payments knowing what they're for. I can't keep enabling this." As they prepared to leave the church, Aisha's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Captain Grant." The voice was electronically distorted. "You have no idea what you're really fighting. New Horizon is just one tentacle. The real power hasn't even shown itself yet. Back off now, or your daughter's acceptance to Columbia University might suddenly be revoked. Her scholarship might disappear. Accidents happen to 18-year-olds who don't watch where they're going." The line went dead, and Aisha felt rage build in her chest like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. They were threatening Maya again, but now with specifics that showed they'd been watching, planning, gathering leverage for months, or maybe years. "What did they say?" Jordan asked, seeing her expression. "They know about Maya's college plans. They're threatening her future, not just her safety." Reverend Hale placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then we need to move faster than they expect. Tomorrow's city council meeting, half the city will be there because of what happened to you. That's our moment." "To do what?" Aisha asked. "To blow this whole thing wide open. To name names, show evidence, make it impossible for them to hide. But Captain Grant, once we do this, there's no going back. They'll come at you with everything they have." Aisha thought about Maya blowing out her candles, wishing for something in a world that seemed increasingly dark. She thought about the 3,000 people trapped in New Horizons' web. She thought about Hardy's smile as he pointed a gun at her, so confident in his protection that he was willing to commit murder in a parking garage. "They already are coming at me with everything," she said. "The only difference is now we're going to fight back in public where they can't hide in the shadows." That evening, as they prepared for war disguised as a city council meeting, none of them noticed the man in the coffee shop across from the hotel, watching through high-powered binoculars, speaking quietly into a phone. "Yes, Mr. Wilson. They're planning to go public tomorrow at the council meeting." "Yes, sir, I understand. The contingency plan is ready. Captain Grant won't make it to that podium." But Vincent Wilson, sitting in his penthouse office overlooking the city he thought he owned, had underestimated Aisha Grant. He'd seen her as just another cop, maybe a little more stubborn than most, but ultimately breakable like all the others. He didn't understand that 20 years of fighting for justice had prepared her for this moment, that a mother's rage was more powerful than his money, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the system could be forced to work despite itself. The storm was coming, and it would break over City Hall tomorrow with a force that would shake the foundations of everything Wilson and his conspirators had built. But tonight, in a hotel room guarded by activists and lawyers and journalists, a mother and daughter shared a quiet birthday dinner, both knowing that tomorrow would change everything one way or another. The morning of the city council meeting arrived with an unseasonable thunderstorm that turned the streets into rivers and seemed to mirror the turmoil about to unfold. Aisha stood before the bathroom mirror in their hotel room, adjusting the collar of her best suit, the one she wore for formal department ceremonies and court testimonies. Today felt like both. "Mom, there's something weird happening online," Maya called from the other room, her voice tight with concern. Aisha found her daughter staring at her laptop screen where social media was exploding with a coordinated campaign of posts claiming that Aisha had a history of mental instability, that she'd been under investigation for months before the mall incident, that the whole thing was a setup to sue the city for millions. "They're trying to destroy your credibility before you even speak," Jordan said, looking over Maya's shoulder. He was already dressed in his lawyer's armor, a charcoal suit that made him look like he could take on the Supreme Court. Classic disinformation campaign. They must have had this ready to go. Nadia was on her phone talking rapidly to her editor. "No, we need to push back now. Get the real story out before this narrative takes hold." She paused listening, then her face went pale. "What do you mean you can't run it? Since when does Vincent Wilson have editorial control over—" "He bought the paper." "When?" She hung up, looking stunned. "Wilson's company acquired majority shares in the Tribune Group this morning. 3 newspapers and 2 local TV stations. My story just got killed." The weight of what they were facing settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just corruption. It was a complete capture of the systems meant to provide checks and balances. But Tiana, young and unbroken by years of seeing how things really worked, stood up with her phone in hand. "They can buy newspapers, but they can't buy the internet. I've got 50,000 followers, and the video has 30 million views now. People are flying in from other cities to be at this meeting. They can't stop all of us." A knock on the door interrupted them. Through the peephole, Aisha saw Sergeant Davis with 2 other officers she recognized as clean cops, ones who'd never appeared on Chen's payment lists. "Captain Grant," Davis said when Aisha opened the door. "We're here to escort you to City Hall. Not officially, you understand. We're all off duty. But after what happened to Hardy and Mercer, we thought you might appreciate some backup." The gesture nearly brought tears to Aisha's eyes. After days of feeling like the entire system was against her, here were cops choosing justice over comfort, risking their careers to stand with her. The drive to City Hall was surreal. Despite the rain, crowds had gathered along the route holding signs that read, "Justice for Captain Grant" and "End the Pipeline." But there were other signs, 2 professionally printed ones that said, "Grant the Grifter" and "Mental Health Matters," the astroturfed opposition Wilson's money had purchased. City Hall's steps were packed a sea of umbrellas and rain-soaked protesters. Police barriers had been erected, creating a narrow pathway that Aisha and her group had to walk through. As they approached, the crowd erupted in competing chants, voices clashing like armies on an ancient battlefield. Inside the council chambers were standing room only. The 5 council members sat at their elevated bench like judges at a tribunal, and Aisha noticed that 3 of them, the ones Chen had identified as being on New Horizons' payroll, weren't making eye contact with anyone. Council President Patricia Hawkins, a woman who'd built her career on being tough on crime, gavelled the meeting to order with unnecessary force. "We have a packed agenda today," Hawkins announced, her voice carrying through the microphone with practiced authority. "But first I want to address the elephant in the room. The incident at Ridgeview Galleria has generated significant public interest, and we've received numerous requests for public comment. However, as this is an ongoing investigation—" "Point of order," Reverend Hale's voice boomed from the gallery. "The public comment period is guaranteed by city charter. You can't skip it because the topic makes you uncomfortable." Hawkins's face flushed. "Reverend, you're out of order. Please sit down or you'll be removed." "Then you'll have to remove all of us," someone else shouted, and suddenly the entire gallery was on its feet. The 2 council members not on Wilson's payroll, Janet Rodriguez and Marcus Chen, no relation to David, exchanged glances, and then Rodriguez spoke into her microphone. "I move to open the floor for public comment regarding the Ridgeview incident and related matters of public safety." "Seconded," Marcus Chen said quickly. Hawkins looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "The motion requires a vote. All in favor." Rodriguez and Chen raised their hands. After a long moment, Thomas Murphy, one of the compromised council members, slowly raised his hand as well. The crowd's pressure was cracking their solidarity. Motion passes, Hawkins said through gritted teeth. Public comment will be limited to 2 minutes per speaker. I cede my time to Captain Grant, the first speaker said immediately, and then the next and the next. Within moments, a dozen citizens had given Aisha their time, turning her 2 minutes into nearly half an hour. As she approached this podium, Wilson himself entered through a side door, taking a seat in the reserved section his presence meant to intimidate. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that graced business magazines and charity galas. His suit probably cost more than most people's cars, and his smile was the cold expression of a man who'd never been told no. Aisha set her folder on the podium, David Chen's flash drive visible in her hand. She looked directly at Wilson as she began to speak. My name is Captain Aisha Grant. I've served this city for 20 years. I've delivered babies in housing projects, talked suicidal teenagers off bridges, and held the hands of dying gang members who called for their mothers. I thought I'd seen the worst this city had to offer. I was wrong. She clicked the flash drive into the podium's computer system, and suddenly the council's display screens lit up with Chen's documents. Hawkins frantically tried to turn them off, but Marcus Chen, who'd clearly been prepared for this, had already locked the system from his terminal. What you're seeing, Aisha continued, as gasps rippled through the room, are payment records from New Horizons Supervision Services to various city officials, including 3 members of this council. This is illegally obtained evidence, Hawkins shouted, standing up. Security, remove this woman. But the security guards, many of whom were off-duty cops who knew and respected Aisha, didn't move. One of them actually stepped back, creating more space for her to speak. These payments, Aisha pressed on, her voice growing stronger, were bribes to support a system where innocent people are arrested on false charges, forced into plea deals, and then trapped in a for-profit probation system that generates millions in revenue for New Horizon and its parent company, Ridgeview Development Group. Wilson stood up, his movement drawing every eye. These are slanderous accusations from a mentally unstable woman who assaulted mall security and is now trying to profit from her own criminal behavior. Then let's look at the evidence, Aisha said, clicking to the next slide. It was the video Tiana had captured, but enhanced and slowed down. This is Officer Hardy, who supposedly had never met Karen Pierce before responding to her call, having a conversation with her 20 minutes before I entered the store. This is them exchanging what forensic analysis confirms is a cell phone. This is premeditated conspiracy to commit false arrest. The crowd erupted. Wilson's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in a severe black suit, stood up and announced, "My client refuses to participate in this circus. We'll see you in court, Captain Grant." As Wilson moved to leave, Aisha played her final card. "Mr. Wilson, before you go, perhaps you'd like to explain this." The screen showed an email from Wilson himself to Hardy dated a week before the incident. "The Grant problem needs to be handled. She's been asking too many questions about Ridgeview. Make it happen." Wilson froze mid-step. The email had been in Hardy's deleted folder recovered by the FBI's cyber forensics team and leaked to Nadia just an hour before the meeting. It was the smoking gun that connected the billionaire directly to the conspiracy. "That's fabricated," Wilson said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. "That's not my email." "It came from your corporate server," Marcus Chen said from his counsel seat, holding up his own tablet. "I've got the authentication headers right here. IP address matches your office. Timestamp matches your calendar. You were in the building when it was sent." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, protesters were chanting, and Hawkins was banging her gavel so hard it looked like she might break the bench. But through it all, Aisha kept her eyes on Wilson, watching as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Then the lights went out. The emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. But in that moment of darkness, Aisha heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive click of a hammer being pulled back on a revolver. She dropped behind the podium just as the shot rang out, wood splintering where her head had been. Screams filled the chamber as people dove for cover. A second shot fired, this one striking the wall behind where Wilson had been standing, though he'd already been tackled to the ground by his security team. In the confusion and red-tinged shadows, Aisha saw a figure in a maintenance uniform moving through the crowd, weapon raised, searching for a target. "Everyone down, everyone!" Sergeant Davis shouted, her service weapon already drawn. Other off-duty officers were responding, but in the packed room with civilians everywhere, no one had a clear shot. The shooter fired again, this time hitting the laptop on the podium, destroying Chen's evidence in a shower of sparks. Aisha rolled behind the council bench as wood chips exploded around her, the shooter methodically destroying evidence while trying to eliminate witnesses. Then Tiana did something insanely brave and utterly stupid. She stood up with her phone's flashlight on, making herself a target while live-streaming everything. "This is happening right now," she shouted to her audience. "They're trying to kill Captain Grant at City Hall." The shooter spun toward her, and in that moment Davis had her shot. The crack of her service weapon was followed by the shooter's gun clattering across the floor. The figure in the maintenance uniform crumpled, clutching their shoulder, and when the regular lights flickered back on, moments later, everyone could see who it was. Officer Mercer lay on the ground very much alive, despite the news reports of his death, blood spreading from his shoulder wound. The maintenance uniform was a disguise, the reported death a cover story, the entire thing, another layer of Wilson's conspiracy. "Somebody call an ambulance," Rodriguez shouted, but Aisha was already moving, kicking Mercer's gun away and using her belt as a tourniquet on his shoulder. Even as she worked to save his life, she could hear him mumbling through his pain. "Wilson promised millions. Said Hardy was weak, had to die. You were supposed to die too." Sergeant Davis was reading him his rights while applying pressure to the wound, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Wilson wasn't listening to Miranda rights. He was on his phone, and Aisha could hear him clearly in the sudden silence that followed the shooting. "Activate Contingency 7. All of it. Now." Within minutes they understood what Contingency 7 meant. Every person who'd been arrested at Ridgeview and was currently on New Horizon probation, over 2,000 people, received an automated notification that they'd violated their probation terms, and warrants were being issued for their immediate arrest. It was a digital hostage situation, with thousands of innocent people suddenly becoming fugitives. David Chen, who'd been crouched behind a pillar during the shooting, stood up with his laptop. "I can stop it," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "I still have admin access to the New Horizon system, but I need to get to their servers." "That's breaking and entering," Hawkins said weakly, though her authority had evaporated along with her composure. "Actually," Jordan said, stepping forward with a document, "I have a court order from Judge Harrison granting emergency access to New Horizon facilities to prevent imminent harm to public safety. Signed 20 minutes ago when we realized Wilson might try something like this." Wilson's lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear, but the billionaire shook her off. His perfect composure had cracked, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said to Aisha, his voice carrying despite the distance between them. "This is bigger than New Horizon, bigger than Ridgeview. You're interfering with a national program, federal contracts, congressional support. You think you're David fighting Goliath, but Goliath has friends in very high places. Then they can all fall together," Aisha replied, standing tall despite the blood on her clothes from treating Mercer's wound. "Every empire built on oppression eventually crumbles. Yours just happened to meet its end in a mall jewelry store." The sound of helicopters became audible over the rain, and through the windows, everyone could see federal agents rappelling onto the City Hall roof. The FBI task force Halverson had mentioned was moving in, though whether they were there to help or harm remained to be seen. Halverson himself appeared in the doorway, no longer the confident mentor Aisha remembered, but a haggard man carrying the weight of his choices. "Vincent Wilson, You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, attempted murder, and violations of federal civil rights laws." Wilson laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. Mark, you really think your handlers at the Bureau don't know about this program? You think they're going to let you bring me down when I'm running operations in 17 states? The revelation hit the room like a bomb. 17 states. This wasn't just a local corruption scandal. It was a nationwide criminal enterprise disguised as criminal justice reform. "We have immunity deals." Wilson continued, growing more confident. "Signed by the Justice Department. Everything we've done has been authorized at the highest levels." "Not murder," Halverson said quietly. "Not shooting cops in parking garages. Not trying to assassinate a police captain at a city council meeting. You went off script, Vincent, and that's what's going to bring you down." As federal agents moved in to arrest Wilson, his phone rang one more time. He looked at the screen and his face went white. He answered it on speaker, maybe hoping for salvation, maybe just wanting witnesses to whatever came next. "Mr. Wilson," the electronically distorted voice said, the same one that had threatened Aisha days ago. "Your services are no longer required. Your access has been terminated. Your accounts have been frozen. You've become a liability." The line went dead, and Wilson stood there holding his phone like it might explode. In seconds, he'd gone from untouchable billionaire to disposable asset, cut loose by the shadowy forces he'd thought were his partners. "I want a deal," he said, immediately turning to Halverson. "Full immunity in exchange for everything. Names, dates, account numbers, all of it." "That's not your call to make," Halverson replied. But Aisha could see him calculating, weighing the value of Wilson's information against the crimes he'd committed. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, arrests, and emergency injunctions. The false probation violations were reversed, though not before dozens of people had already been wrongfully arrested. 3 city council members resigned on the spot. Chief Patterson was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Karen Pierce was arrested at the airport trying to flee to Costa Rica. As the sun set over the city, painting the rain-washed streets in shades of gold and amber, Aisha stood on the City Hall steps with Maya Jordan, Nadia, and Tiana. The crowd had grown throughout the day, and now thousands of people filled the square holding candles that flickered like stars in the gathering darkness. "You did it, Mom," Maya said, leaning against her mother's shoulder. "You brought them down." "We did it," Aisha corrected, looking at the faces around her, the activists who'd refused to be silent, the journalists who'd refused to be bought, the cops who'd chosen justice over job security, the ordinary citizens who'd stood up when it mattered most. "And it's not over." Wilson was right about one thing. "This is bigger than one city. 17 states," he said. "That's 17 fights we need to have." Reverend Hale approached them, his face showing both exhaustion and determination. "Captain Grant, I just got off the phone with community leaders in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix. They've all found similar programs in their cities. The Ridgeview model, just like Chen warned us. But now they know what to look for. You've started something here." Tiana held up her phone, showing the view count on her live stream of the shooting. 50 million views and climbing. The whole world saw what happened here today. They can't hide anymore. But even in victory, Aisha knew the fight was far from over. Wilson would likely get his deal trading information for freedom. The shadowy voice on the phone represented powers that hadn't been touched. The system that allowed this to happen, the for-profit prisons, the quotas, the plea deal machinery, was still largely intact. "What now?" Maya asked, voicing what they were all thinking. "Now we keep pushing," Aisha said, thinking of the 3,000 people whose lives had been derailed by false arrests of the 17 states where similar programs were operating, of all the future victims who might be saved if they didn't stop fighting. "We've cracked the door open. Now we need to kick it down." As they walked down the steps together, the crowd parted respectfully, some people applauding, others simply nodding in recognition of what had been accomplished and what still needed to be done. Behind them, City Hall stood illuminated against the night sky, its lights no longer hiding shadows, but exposing them, forcing them into the open, where justice might finally reach them. But in a penthouse office in another city, another state figures were already meeting, already planning, already adapting. The Ridgeview model had failed, but there would be other models, other schemes, other ways to profit from human misery. The war between justice and injustice never truly ended. It only paused to reload. For tonight, though, in this city, the good guys had won a battle. And sometimes Aisha thought, as she held her daughter close, that had to be enough to keep fighting tomorrow. The federal courthouse at dawn looked like a fortress preparing for siege, with news vans forming a modern moat around its limestone walls, and protesters already gathering despite the early hour. 3 weeks had passed since the City Hall shooting, and today, Vincent Wilson would testify before a grand jury, his immunity deal contingent on providing what the FBI called substantial assistance in dismantling the nationwide network he'd helped create. Aisha sat in the witness waiting room, her hands steady despite the weight of what was coming. She'd been reinstated to full duty with commendations, but the gold shield in her pocket felt heavier now, marked by everything she'd learned about the system it represented. Beside her, David Chen reviewed his notes one last time, his transformation from nervous accountant to key witness remarkable in its completeness. "They're saying Wilson's going to name senators," Chen whispered, his voice carrying the disbelief that still colored discussions of how high this conspiracy reached. "Federal judges. Someone in the State Department who's been steering prison contracts to New Horizon subsidiaries overseas." Before Aisha could respond, the door opened and Halverson entered, looking older than his years, but clear-eyed in a way he hadn't been during his time as a double agent. "They're ready for you, Captain Grant. You're up first." The grand jury room was smaller than Aisha expected, intimate, in a way that made lies harder to tell. 23 citizens sat in tiered rows, their faces showing the exhaustion of having already heard 2 days of testimony about horrors dressed up as law enforcement. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Winters, who'd flown in from Washington specifically for this case, nodded for Aisha to begin. "Please state your name for the record." "Captain Aisha Grant, Metro Police Department, badge number 4827. "Captain Grant, can you tell us about the events of Saturday, September 14th? As Aisha began recounting that day at Ridgeview Galleria, she noticed movement in the jury box. One juror, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, was texting under the table. It was subtle, professional, but Aisha's 2 decades of police work had taught her to notice when someone was trying to hide something. "Excuse me," she said, stopping mid-sentence. "That juror is communicating with someone outside this room." Winters spun around and the man tried to pocket his phone, but 2 federal marshals were already moving. What they found when they checked his device sent shockwaves through the room. He was live-streaming the testimony to an encrypted channel with over 100 viewers. "Clear the room," Winters commanded, her voice ice-cold with fury. "Marshals, arrest him. This grand jury is compromised." As chaos erupted, the man shouted something that chilled Aisha to her core. "You can't stop what's already in motion. The restructuring has already begun." The restructuring. Those words echoed in Aisha's mind as she was ushered to a secure room while federal agents tried to determine how deep the breach went. Through the window, she could see Wilson being brought in through a separate entrance, surrounded by enough security for a head of state. Their eyes met briefly, and he mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry," before disappearing inside. "Captain Grant." Agent Winters appeared, her composure restored, but tension visible in the set of her shoulders. "We've identified the juror, Marcus Webb, employed by Prometheus Associates, a consulting firm with contracts in 37 states. They're not just running programs like New Horizon, they're rebuilding them, learning from your victory here to create something worse." "Worse how?" Aisha asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Digital," Winters replied, pulling up files on her tablet. "No more physical arrests that can be filmed. Instead, algorithmic assessments that automatically generate warrants based on social media activity, shopping patterns, geographic profiling. They're calling it preventative justice modeling. They can criminalize someone before they even know they're in the system. The door burst open, and Tiana rushed in, her face flushed with urgency. "Captain Grant, you need to see this. Something's happening at the mall." On Tiana's phone, a live stream showed Ridgeview Galleria, surrounded by police cars, not in response to any crime, but in formation, like they were protecting something. Or someone. As they watched, a convoy of black SUVs arrived, and out stepped a woman Aisha recognized from newspaper photos, Catherine Walsh, the CEO of Prometheus Associates, Wilson's former mentor, and according to FBI intelligence, the architect of the entire private prison pipeline system. Why is she here? Aisha wondered aloud, but the answer became clear as Walsh entered the mall with a phalanx of lawyers and security. She was taking over publicly, brazenly, as if the federal investigation was merely a minor inconvenience. "We need to get there," Aisha said, already moving toward the door. "You can't leave," Winters protested. "You're under federal protection until you testify." "Then protect me there," Aisha shot back. "This woman is making a statement. She's showing everyone that even with Wilson in custody, even with federal investigators involved, they're untouchable. If we don't respond, everything we've fought for means nothing." The ride to Ridgeview Galleria felt like traveling backward in time, except now Aisha was in an FBI convoy instead of shopping for her daughter's birthday. The mall parking lot had become a battlefield of opposing forces. Protesters on one side, private security on the other, media everywhere, trying to make sense of the sudden escalation. Catherine Walsh stood at the mall's main entrance holding an impromptu press conference. She was everything Wilson wasn't: older, more polished, with the kind of inherited wealth that had never known challenge or consequence. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never been told no and didn't expect to start now. "The recent disruptions to our public-private partnerships have been unfortunate," she was saying as Aisha approached. "But Prometheus Associates remains committed to innovative solutions in criminal justice reform. The Ridgeview model may have had implementation issues, but the concept remains sound. We're simply evolving to meet modern challenges." "You mean you're evolving to avoid accountability?" Aisha interrupted, her voice carrying across the crowd. The cameras swung toward her like predators sensing blood. Walsh's smile didn't waver. "Captain Grant, the woman of the hour, I understand you've had a traumatic experience, but that doesn't make you an expert on criminal justice policy." 20 years on the force makes me an expert," Aisha replied, stepping closer despite the security guards tensing around Walsh. "And what you call innovation, I call systematic oppression dressed up in corporate speak." "Such dramatic language," Walsh said with practiced condescension. "This is why we need professionals handling these matters, not emotional responses to isolated incidents." The crowd was growing, people streaming from stores to witness this confrontation. Among them, Aisha spotted familiar faces, Reverend Hale Jordan Lee, even some of the officers who'd escorted her to City Hall. But there were new faces too. Harder ones, people whose eyes tracked her movements with professional assessment. Isolated incidents. David Chen suddenly appeared, having somehow slipped away from his federal handlers. He held up a tablet showing spreadsheets that made Walsh's smile finally falter. "I have records of 47,000 false arrests across your programs nationwide. Isolated isn't the word I'd use." Walsh's security moved to intercept Chen, but Sergeant Davis and several other officers formed a protective barrier around him. The tension ratcheted up another notch, private force facing public force, the very question of legitimate authority hanging in the air. "Those records were stolen," Walsh said, her voice losing its smoothness. "Illegally obtained evidence has no standing." "But dead bodies do," a new voice said, and everyone turned to see Officer Mercer being wheeled forward in a wheelchair, his shoulder still bandaged, but his desire for revenge apparently stronger than his pain. "I can testify about every order Wilson gave, every payment made, every murder planned, including yours, Ms. Walsh. He was going to have you killed after the IPO, make it look like a terrorist attack, collect the insurance and your shares." Walsh went pale, her composure cracking for the first time. "That's absurd. Vincent would never." "I have the recordings," Mercer continued, pulling out a phone. "Every conversation, every plan. I was supposed to be his insurance policy." "Guess I'm yours now, Captain Grant." The crowd gasped as Mercer played an audio file, Wilson's voice clear and cold. "Catherine thinks she's untouchable, but everyone's touchable. After the offering goes through and we have the capital, she has a skiing accident or a heart attack. Make it clean, make it look natural, and make sure her shares transfer to the holding company." Walsh stumbled backward, her security detail suddenly looking uncertain about who they were supposed to be protecting her from. In that moment of chaos, Aisha noticed something. One of the security guards was reaching inside his jacket. His movement too smooth, too practiced, the motion of someone who'd drawn a weapon many times before. "Gun!" Aisha shouted, throwing herself at Walsh just as the shot rang out. The bullet passed through the space where Walsh's head had been, shattering the glass door behind them. Screams erupted as people dove for cover, but the shooter was already moving, trying to get a clear second shot. Jordan Lee, proving that law school hadn't completely civilized his street instincts, tackled the shooter from behind, sending them both crashing into a decorative fountain. The gun went spinning across the wet marble, and Sergeant Davis was on it immediately, securing the weapon, while other officers piled onto the struggling shooter. When they pulled the ski mask off, the shooter's identity sent another shockwave through the crowd. It was Thomas Murphy, the city council member who'd been taking bribes, supposedly under federal investigation, but somehow free and armed at exactly the right moment to silence Walsh. "You don't understand," Murphy gasped as they cuffed him. "If she talks, we're all dead. They have kill switches on everyone. Talk and die, that's the rule. That's always been the rule." Kill switches. Aisha helped Walsh to her feet, the CEO trembling with the realization of how close she'd come to death. "Who's they?" Aisha demanded. "Who's really running this?" Walsh looked at her with eyes that had seen behind the corporate veil and found something monstrous. "I thought I knew. I thought it was just business, just politics. But there are people above me, above Vincent, above everyone you can see. They don't have names you'd recognize. They don't appear in any corporate filings. They just exist. And they protect their investments." Agent Winters had arrived with a full FBI tactical team, taking control of the scene with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times. "Ms. Walsh, you're now under federal protection. And frankly, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and about 50 other charges. But if you cooperate fully, we might be able to keep you alive long enough to serve your sentence." As Walsh was led away, she turned back to Aisha. "Captain Grant, you need to understand something. What you've exposed here is just one tentacle of something that goes back decades. Private prisons, defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, tech giants, they're all connected, all feeding from the same trough. And that trough is filled with human misery monetized at scale. Then we'll drain it," Aisha said firmly. "One arrest at a time if necessary." Walsh laughed bitterly. "You can't arrest what you can't see, but maybe you can make them visible. The IPO documents, the ones Wilson was preparing, they had to list shadow investors. Shell companies, but traceable if you know where to look. Find those documents before they disappear." She was pulled into an SUV before she could say more, but David Chen was already on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "I know where those documents would be. New Horizons' secure server, but the building's probably locked down." "Not anymore," Nadia said, showing them her phone. A breaking news alert showed the New Horizon headquarters with its doors wide open, employees streaming out carrying boxes of documents and hard drives. Someone triggered a whistleblower exodus. Every employee with a conscience is grabbing evidence and running. The race was on. Aisha and her team rushed to New Horizons' offices, finding a scene of corporate chaos. Employees were literally throwing documents out windows to protesters below who were scanning and uploading them in real time. Years of carefully hidden crimes were being exposed at broadband speed. In the executive suite, they found Wilson's personal assistant, Margaret Chen, David's aunt, as it turned out standing guard over a safe that had been blown open with what looked like professional expertise. 20 years I worked for these monsters, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. 20 years of scheduling their crimes like they were board meetings. But I kept copies of everything. Every email, every memo, every payment. It's all here. She handed Aisha a hard drive that felt heavier than its physical weight suggested. The shadow investors Walsh mentioned, they're all in there. But Captain Grant, when you see the names, some of them are people you trust. People everyone trusts. Before Aisha could ask what she meant, alarms started blaring through the building. Not fire alarms, something else, something electronic and urgent. Every computer screen in the office suddenly displayed the same message. System purge initiated. All data will be permanently deleted in 60 seconds. They're wiping everything remotely, David shouted desperately, trying to copy files as fast as possible. I need more time. Aisha grabbed a fire axe from the wall and started smashing servers, hoping physical destruction would prevent remote deletion. Others followed suit, the office becoming a battlefield against time and technology. Sparks flew, smoke filled the air, and through it all the countdown continued. 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Got it, David yelled, pulling out a backup drive just as the screens went dark. I saved what I could, but they killed the rest. Through the smoke and chaos, Aisha saw something that made her blood run cold. On one of the few functioning monitors, a new message had appeared. You've won this round, Captain Grant, but the game is far from over. Check your daughter's school, now. Every maternal instinct Aisha possessed screamed to life. She ran from the building, commandeering a police car with its sirens wailing, racing toward Columbia University, where Maya was touring the campus she'd dreamed of attending. The 20-minute drive felt like hours, every red light a potential barrier between her and her daughter's safety. She burst onto the campus to find it in lockdown, security guards everywhere, and Maya nowhere to be seen. Her phone rang, unknown number, but she answered immediately. Mom. Maya's voice was scared but trying to be strong. I'm okay. I'm with campus security. But Mom, there was a man. He said to give you a message. He said the captain always goes down with the ship. Where are you exactly? Aisha demanded, already running toward the administration building. Safe room in the dean's office. But Mom, the man, I recognized him. It was Chief Patterson. He was wearing maintenance clothes, but it was definitely him. Patterson. Her own chief, the man who was supposed to be under federal investigation, was free and making threats against her daughter. The corruption ran so deep that even federal custody wasn't secure. When Aisha finally reached Maya holding her daughter tight, while campus security and FBI agents secured the building, she realized that Walsh had been right. They couldn't arrest what they couldn't see, and the enemy had more faces than a hydra. Every victory revealed new enemies. Every answer raised new questions. But as she stood there with Maya safe in her arms, surrounded by allies who'd chosen justice over comfort, Aisha made a decision. They wanted her to be scared, to back down, to accept that some fights were too big to win. Instead, she would become their worst nightmare, a cop who couldn't be bought, broken, or buried with evidence they couldn't destroy and allies they couldn't eliminate. What happens now? Maya asked the same question she'd asked weeks ago on the City Hall steps. This time, Aisha had a different answer. Now we stop playing defense. We have the names, the evidence, the momentum. Time to bring the whole thing down. Her phone buzzed with messages from across the country. Atlanta, Chicago, Houston. Phoenix prosecutors and police captains and journalists and activists, all saying the same thing: they'd found New Horizon-style programs in their cities, and they were ready to fight. The revolution Aisha had accidentally started was spreading, and no algorithm or shadow investor or kill switch could stop it. But even as hope bloomed, Aisha noticed something troubling in the evidence Margaret had provided. One name kept appearing in the shadow investor lists connected to shell companies in dozens of states. A name that shouldn't have been there, that represented a betrayal so fundamental it threatened to shatter everything Aisha believed about justice and loyalty. The name was Judge Harrison, the same judge who'd signed their emergency warrant to search New Horizon, who'd been considered one of the few clean judges in the city. He wasn't just invested in the conspiracy. According to these documents, he was one of its architects, playing both sides while determining which cases moved forward and which disappeared into legal limbo. The real war was just beginning, and the enemy wore the face of justice itself. The revelation about Judge Harrison sat like poison in Aisha's throat as she stood in Jordan's office at midnight, the city lights below them looking like stars that had fallen to earth and gotten dirty. The evidence was spread across every surface: financial records, encrypted communications, photographs of Harrison meeting with Walsh and Wilson dating back 15 years. The judge hadn't just been corrupted, he'd been one of the corruption's founding fathers. "We can't use him anymore," Jordan said, stating the obvious while pacing like a caged animal. "Every warrant he signed, every ruling he made in our favor, it's all tainted now. He was playing us, controlling the investigation from both sides." "It's worse than that," David Chen said, looking up from his laptop with an expression of dawning horror. "I've been tracking the cases Harrison presided over. Every major civil rights victory in the past decade, every police reform ruling he was involved. But look at what happened afterward." He pulled up a chart showing the aftermath of Harrison's seemingly progressive rulings. Each victory had been followed by a new private company stepping in to implement the reforms, companies that all traced back to Prometheus Associates or its subsidiaries. Harrison hadn't been delivering justice. He'd been creating market opportunities for the prison industrial complex. Aisha's phone rang. Sergeant Davis, who was supposed to be watching Patterson's house with a federal surveillance team. "Captain Patterson's gone, but he left something behind. You need to see this." 20 minutes later, they stood in Patterson's home office, which looked like the command center of a paranoid conspiracy theorist, except all the conspiracies were real. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and red string connecting various players in the corruption network. At the center was a photo of Aisha, with a single word written beneath it: Catalyst. "He'd been tracking you for years," Davis said, pointing to surveillance photos dating back to Aisha's rookie days. "Look at this: every major case you worked, every promotion you earned, every commendation. He was documenting everything." But why? Aisha wondered aloud, then found her answer in a journal Patterson had left open on his desk, perhaps intentionally. The entry was dated the day before the mall incident. "Grant is perfect, unimpeachable record, community trust, and most importantly, she actually believes in justice. When we take her down, the entire reform movement will collapse. No one will trust cop testimony again. Wilson's getting impatient, but the timing has to be perfect. The mall incident is set. After tomorrow, Aisha Grant will be either dead or destroyed, and with her goes the last hope for real change in this city." The words blurred as tears of rage filled Aisha's eyes. They hadn't just randomly targeted her. She'd been chosen, groomed, set up over years to be the perfect victim whose fall would destroy public faith in police reform forever. "Captain," Davis said softly, "there's more." She led them to the basement where Patterson had built what could only be described as a shrine to the conspiracy. Financial records showed he'd been on the take for 20 years, but more disturbing were the photographs of other cops who'd tried to expose the corruption. Beside each photo was a newspaper clipping: "Suicide accident, killed in the line of duty." At least a dozen officers who'd gotten too close to the truth, all dead. Aisha's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check the news." She turned on Patterson's television to find breaking news coverage of Judge Harrison holding a press conference on the federal courthouse steps, Agent Winters standing beside him, looking like she'd swallowed glass. After careful consideration of the evidence, Harrison was saying, his judge's voice carrying absolute authority, "I'm issuing a ruling that all evidence obtained in the New Horizon investigation was illegally acquired. The warrants were improperly executed, the surveillance was unconstitutional, and any testimony obtained under these circumstances is inadmissible. He can't do that, Jordan said, but his voice carried more hope than certainty. Harrison continued his expression, showing the satisfied smile of a man who knew he'd won. Furthermore, I'm appointing a special prosecutor to investigate Captain Aisha Grant and her associates for conspiracy breaking and entering destruction of property and violation of civil rights. David Chen is to be arrested immediately for corporate espionage. The room exploded into chaos. David's laptop started screaming with intrusion alerts. Someone was trying to remotely access his files. Nadia's phone rang with her editor telling her she was fired effective immediately. Jordan received an email from the state bar saying his license was under review. They were being systematically destroyed, their entire movement unraveling in real time. "We need to run," David said, already packing his equipment. "If they arrest me, all this evidence disappears into federal custody and never sees daylight again." But Aisha stood still, something crystallizing in her mind. No, running is what they expect. We're going to do what they don't expect. We're going to attack. She pulled out her phone and called Tiana. "Are you still streaming?" "Always," the young activist replied. "I've got 100,000 viewers right now watching Harrison's press conference." "Good. Tell them to meet us at Ridgeview Galleria in 1 hour. Tell them to bring everyone they know, and Tiana. Tell them to bring their phones. We're going to need every camera we can get." "Mom, what are you planning?" Maya asked, having been silent until now, processing the magnitude of the betrayal they faced. "Harrison says the evidence is inadmissible in court," Aisha replied, her voice carrying the steel that had made her a captain. "But there's another court, the court of public opinion, and we're about to hold the trial of the century." They moved fast, knowing federal agents would be coming for David soon. Jordan worked his phone, calling every civil rights lawyer he knew. Nadia reached out to independent journalists, the ones who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Reverend Hale activated his network of churches, sending out the modern equivalent of Paul Revere's ride through social media and text chains. By the time they reached Ridgeview Galleria, the crowd was already forming. Hundreds, then thousands, streaming in from every direction. The mall security, the same ones who'd started this whole nightmare, tried to close the gates, but the crowd simply walked through them, their sheer numbers making resistance impossible. Aisha stood where it had all began, in front of Celestial Boutique, using a megaphone someone had handed her. Behind her, David projected the evidence onto the mall's massive exterior walls. Financial records, emails, photos, videos, turning the building into a canvas displaying its owner's crimes. "They say this evidence is inadmissible." Aisha announced, her voice echoing through the crowd and into thousands of live streams. "They say proper procedures weren't followed." Well, let me tell you about proper procedures. Proper procedures are what allowed 3,000 innocent people to be arrested here. Proper procedures are what let them build a pipeline from this mall to private prisons. Proper procedures are what killed a dozen good cops who tried to expose this. The crowd roared its approval, but Aisha noticed something troubling. Mixed among the protesters were hard-faced men and women who didn't belong, weren't cheering, weren't recording. They were watching, waiting, and their hands stayed suspiciously close to concealed weapons. "They've sent provocateurs," Jordan whispered urgently. "They're going to try to turn this into a riot, discredit the whole movement." Before Aisha could respond, gunshots rang out, not at them, but into the air from multiple positions in the crowd. People screamed, started running, and in the chaos, Aisha saw the trap. News helicopters were already overhead, ready to broadcast images of a violent mob of protesters out of control, of the need for law and order to be restored by any means necessary. But Tiana and her fellow activists were ready. They'd dealt with agent provocateurs before. "Link arms," Tiana shouted through her own megaphone. "Sit down. Peaceful resistance. Don't give them what they want." The crowd, trained by a summer of protests, responded instantly. Thousands of people sat down where they stood, arms-linked phones raised, creating an ocean of peaceful resistance that the provocateurs couldn't navigate. The hired agitators found themselves isolated, exposed, their weapons visible to hundreds of cameras. Real police officers, the ones who still believed in their oaths, moved in and arrested the provocateurs. One of them, as he was being cuffed, made the mistake of saying, "Harrison promised us immunity." The words were captured by dozens of phones, immediately uploaded, shared viral, before the handcuffs were fully secured. Then, Patterson appeared. He walked through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea people, instinctively moving away from the disgraced police chief. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He wore his full uniform, medals and all, as if this was his last stand as a cop. He stopped 20 feet from Aisha, and when he spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd sold his soul in installments over 2 decades. "You want to know the truth, Captain Grant?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The whole truth? Fine, I'll give you everything. Every name, every payment, every murder. But I want something in return." "You're in no position to negotiate," Aisha replied. Patterson laughed bitterly. "I've got a dead man's switch, Captain. If I don't check in every 12 hours, documents get released that will destroy half the government. Not just local, federal. Congressional leaders, cabinet members, Supreme Court justices. The conspiracy you've uncovered? It's a franchise operation. Dozens of cities, hundreds of officials. So yes, I am in a position to negotiate." "What do you want?" Jordan asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in despite the situation. "Safe passage out of the country," Patterson said. "1 hour to get to the private airfield. In exchange, I give you everything. Names, dates, account numbers, murder confessions. Enough to bring down the whole system." "You ran the system," someone in the crowd shouted. "You don't get to walk away." Patterson turned toward the voice. "I was middle management at best. You want the real power, the people who built this machine, then you need what I know. Otherwise, they'll just rebuild elsewhere, having learned from their mistakes here." Aisha felt the weight of the decision. Let a murderer walk free to catch bigger murderers. It went against everything she believed in, but she also knew Patterson was right. They'd only scratched the surface of something massive. "We don't have the authority to make that deal," she said. "No," said a new voice. "But I do." Everyone turned to see a woman in a federal prosecutor's badge walking through the crowd. Not Winters, but someone higher, someone whose face Aisha recognized from congressional hearings. Deputy Attorney General Patricia Hayes, the second highest law enforcement official in the country. "Chief Patterson," Hayes said formally, "I'm prepared to offer you limited immunity and witness protection in exchange for full cooperation. But there's a condition: you testify publicly on live television tomorrow morning. Every detail, every crime, every name. Hold nothing back, and you get your deal." Patterson looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at his former officers, who watched him with disgust. "Fine. But I testify from federal custody. These people will kill me the moment I start talking." "Already arranged," Hayes replied, and FBI agents materialized from the crowd, forming a protective circle around Patterson. As they led him away, Patterson turned back to Aisha one last time. "For what it's worth. Captain, you were exactly what we thought you were: incorruptible. That's why you had to be destroyed. In our world, integrity is the ultimate threat." The crowd erupted in mixed emotions. Anger at the deal, relief at the breakthrough, frustration at the complexity of justice. But Aisha raised her megaphone again. "This isn't over," she announced. "Tomorrow, Patterson testifies. But tonight, we bear witness. David, show them everything." For the next 3 hours, the mall became a theater of truth. David and his team projected document after document, video after video, turning the walls into a massive display of systematic criminality. Other cities joined in virtually projecting the same evidence onto their buildings, creating a nationwide exhibition of corruption exposed. Judge Harrison tried to issue an emergency injunction to stop the display, but no one was listening to him anymore. The Deputy Attorney General had already convened a grand jury, a real one, without compromised jurors, and Harrison's own financial records were being subpoenaed. As midnight approached, Vincent Wilson appeared on the screens, not in person, but in a recorded deposition he'd given that afternoon. His words were clinical, precise, devastating. Judge Harrison received $2 million over 15 years. Senator Blake got $3 million. Congressman Torres, $1.5 million. These aren't bribes, we called them consultation fees paid through law firms and think tanks. Completely legal technically. The beauty of the system is that we didn't break laws. We bought the people who write them. The crowd had grown silent, absorbing the magnitude of what they were learning. Democracy itself had been for sale, and the auction had been going on for decades. Then Maya took the megaphone from her mother's hands. At 18, she had the clarity that comes from seeing the world's ugliness, before developing the calluses to tolerate it. "My name is Maya Grant." She said, her voice steady despite her youth. 3 weeks ago, my mom went to buy me a birthday present and ended up uncovering all of this. They threatened me, tried to take away my college acceptance, tried to use me as leverage. But here's what they didn't understand. We're not afraid anymore. My generation grew up watching you sell our future. We watched you militarize our schools, privatize our prisons, and monetize our suffering. But we also grew up with these. She held up her phone, and thousands of others did the same, their screens creating a constellation of lights in the darkness. We document everything. We share everything. We verify everything. You can't hide anymore. You can't lie anymore. And you can't stop us anymore. The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mall. But even in that moment of triumph, Aisha noticed something troubling. Deputy Attorney General Hayes was on her phone, her expression growing increasingly grim. She approached Aisha quietly. "Captain Grant, we have a problem. Patterson's dead man's switch, it's real, and it's worse than he said. If those documents release, they won't just expose corruption. They'll reveal classified operations, intelligence assets, things that could genuinely damage national security. We need to find where he hid them before someone else does." The celebration suddenly felt premature. They'd won a battle, maybe even a major one, but the war was revealing new complications with every victory. "I might know where they are," David Chen said, having overheard the conversation. Patterson was old school, wouldn't trust cloud storage for something this sensitive. He'd want physical media somewhere he could access, but others couldn't. "Captain Grant, you knew him for 20 years. Where would he feel safe?" Aisha thought about Patterson, about the man she'd thought he was, versus who he'd turned out to be. Then it hit her, his cabin, the one he'd invited the command staff to for retirement parties and holiday gatherings. The one place he'd always called his sanctuary. "I know where they are," she said. "But we need to move fast. If Patterson told us about the dead man's switch, he told others too. They'll be racing to get there first." The convoy that raced toward Patterson's cabin in the mountains consisted of FBI vehicles, local police who'd proven themselves clean, and journalists who refused to be left behind. The 2-hour drive felt like an eternity, every moment potentially too late. They arrived to find the cabin already under assault. Black SUVs surrounded it, and the sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the mountain air. Someone had beaten them there, and they weren't interested in preserving evidence. "Federal agents," Hayes announced through a megaphone. "Cease fire immediately." The response was a grenade that exploded near their vehicle, sending everyone diving for cover. These weren't random criminals. This was a professional military operation. "They're destroying everything," David shouted, pointing to smoke rising from the cabin. "They're burning the evidence." Aisha made a decision that went against all her training. She broke from cover and ran toward the cabin, using the trees and darkness as shields. Behind her, she heard Hayes shouting orders, gunfire, intensifying chaos spreading. But she kept running. She crashed through the cabin's back door to find a scene from a nightmare. 3 men in tactical gear were systematically destroying everything: computers, files, hard drives. One of them turned toward her, raising his weapon, and Aisha recognized him. It was Officer Mercer, supposedly in federal custody, very much free, and apparently working for the highest bidder. "Should have stayed out of it, Captain," he said, his finger moving to the trigger. The shot that rang out didn't come from Mercer's gun. He crumpled to the ground, and behind him stood Halverson, holding a smoking weapon, looking older and sadder than Aisha had ever seen him. "I'm done playing all the sides," Halverson said quietly. "Time to pick one and stick with it." Together, they fought their way through the cabin, Halverson's federal training, and Aisha's street experience, making them an effective team. They found Patterson's safe already opened, most of its contents burning in the fireplace. But David Chen, who'd somehow circled around and entered through a window, was pulling drives from a hidden compartment in the floor. "Got them!" he shouted, just as the ceiling began to collapse from fire damage. They escaped as the cabin became an inferno, the evidence of 20 years of corruption reduced to ash and ember. But David had saved the most important pieces, the dead man's switch files that contained not just evidence of corruption, but the entire blueprint of how the system worked, how it was funded, how it chose its targets. Back at the FBI command vehicle, Hayes reviewed the files with growing amazement and horror. "This is it," she said. "This is everything. Congressional slush funds, judicial bribes, even details about a plan to expand the private prison system internationally. Captain Grant, you've given us enough to reshape the entire justice system." "Then reshape it," Aisha said exhaustedly. "Don't just prosecute a few people and call it reform. Tear the whole thing down and build something better." The next morning, Patterson's televised testimony became the most watched event in American history. From federal custody looking haggard but determined, he laid out 20 years of corruption in excruciating detail. Names, dates, amounts, methods, nothing was held back. By noon, 17, federal judges had recused themselves from all cases. 43 members of Congress had lawyered up, and 3 governors had announced they wouldn't seek re-election. Judge Harrison was arrested trying to board a private jet to Switzerland. Vincent Wilson from his cell offered to testify against everyone in exchange for a reduced sentence. Catherine Walsh had a mysterious heart attack that the autopsy would later rule as poisoning, though no suspect was ever identified. The Ridgeview Galleria was closed permanently. Its assets seized, its space eventually converted into a community center named after the 12 officers who died trying to expose the corruption. New Horizons Supervision Services was disbanded, its victims released from their contracts, their records expunged. 3 months later, Aisha stood in the same spot where she'd been arrested, now transformed into a memorial garden. Maya was beside her home from Colombia for spring break, where she was majoring in criminal justice reform. Tiana was there too now, running a non-profit that trained citizens in their rights when dealing with police. "Was it worth it?" Maya asked, looking at the plaques bearing the names of everyone who'd been falsely arrested at this location. Aisha thought about the question seriously. She'd lost friends, made enemies, discovered that people she'd trusted were monsters, and people she'd dismissed were heroes. The investigation had spread to 17 states as promised, with similar corruptions, exposed, similar battles fought. The system hadn't been destroyed. Systems that big never fully die, but it had been wounded, exposed, forced to reform. "Ask me in 10 years, Aisha finally answered. "Change this big doesn't happen overnight. It happens in increments, in battles won and lost, in people deciding that justice matters more than comfort." Her phone rang. Sergeant Davis, now Captain Davis, after a series of rapid promotions to fill the gaps left by the corruption purge. "Aisha, we've got a situation. Another mall, another false arrest in progress. But this time, the security guards didn't count on their target being a civil rights lawyer who'd watched your entire ordeal. She's broadcasting everything live, and she's asking for you specifically." Aisha smiled grimly. The fight wasn't over, might never be truly over. But now people knew how to fight back, knew what to look for, knew they weren't alone. "On my way," she said, then turned to Maya and Tiana. "Want to come make some good trouble?" They climbed into her car together, 3 generations of women, who'd learned that justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you demanded, something you fought for, something you created one confrontation at a time. As they drove toward the new crisis, Aisha caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. She looked older, certainly more tired, but also more certain. She'd walked into a mall to buy a bracelet and walked out leading a revolution. Not the path she'd planned, but perhaps the one she'd been meant to take all along. Behind them, the memorial garden stood as testament to a simple truth. Sometimes the smallest acts of injustice, when exposed to the light, could illuminate the largest corruptions. And sometimes a mother trying to buy her daughter a birthday present could bring down an empire. The war for justice would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. But today, driving toward another battle with her daughter and their young ally beside her, Captain Aisha Grant knew they'd already won the most important victory. They'd proven that the system could be forced to change, that ordinary people could stand up to extraordinary corruption, and that courage once awakened was contagious. The revolution that started in a mall would spread to every courthouse, every police station, every prison in America. It would take years, maybe decades, to complete. But it had begun, and there was no stopping it now. The powerful had made one fatal mistake. They'd pushed too hard, taken too much, and forgotten that justice, like water, would always find a way through even the smallest crack in their armor. And Captain Aisha Grant had been that crack, widening with each blow until the entire dam burst. The story that began with a false accusation of shoplifting ended with the true thieves being exposed, those who'd stolen justice itself and tried to sell it back to the people piece by piece. But justice, Aisha had learned, couldn't be bought or sold or stolen. It could only be demanded, fought for, and won.